So, good morning, everybody. Welcome that you're here. We are having a leadership session, a webinar, as a part of the ELNE Webinar Week. And ELNE, it stands for Educational Leaderships Network Europe. And today we have a session that is called Shared Leadership in Education, Hydra or a Clear Concept. And we will have perspectives on shared leadership by top researchers. Now, you heard this session will be recorded, so take this in mind when you have any statements to make, or if you are visible, know that this is recorded. And also, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I will try to follow up on every question that you have. So before we start, I would like to introduce our academics. And well, actually, I would like to ask them to introduce themselves. I am starting with the first, Michael Risku. Michael, who are you?
Thank you, Petra, and welcome everyone on my behalf as well. I'm Mika, and as my background, for 7 years I worked as a secondary education teacher, then for 15 years as a secondary education principal, and then the last 16 years as well, most of the time as the head of Institute of Educational Leadership at the University of Jyväskylä. And I'm here.
Thank you, Mika.
Yeah, I'm here as a member of the ELNE research.
Yes, sorry for the interruption.
No worries.
No worries.
Luz, who are you?
Messen. I work as a researcher for ESHA, and I'm also part of the ELNE group. And I also work as a researcher in the University of Applied Sciences of Windesheim, which is based in the Netherlands. And I work with a research group which is interested in inclusive learning environments. And my interest is especially in inclusive leadership.
Thank you, Luz. Mikael, who are you?
Thank you, Petra, and thanks for the kind invitation to join this wonderful webinar. My name is Michael Isomba. I'm a full professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, specialized in social psychology applied to education, regarding issues about leadership in terms of inclusion and equity.
Thank you, Mikael. We also have with us Joseph Kessels. Joseph, who are you?
Thank you, Petra, for inviting me. I'm Joseph Kessels. And I'm a retired professor from the Open University, where I conducted research in the domain of distributed leadership. I always combined my academic career with consultancy in practice, and I helped many organizations, schools, hospitals in improving their learning climate for professional development. And I'm happy to share some of my findings today with you.
Thank you, Joseph. We are actually expecting one more panelist, Anna Cristina Dadio from UNESCO. She is having technical problems, so it may be that she's joining us later, but we start anyway. The next question I have for you, how are you actually professionally interested, connected to this topic of shared leadership? And maybe now we start with Joseph.
My interest in shared leadership, or specifically what I call distributed leadership, is my interest in professional development. And the idea is if professionals want to further develop in their specific domain, they need to claim authority and be able to influence their environment in order to learn. And that's how I became engaged in this topic of leadership. So I'm not so much interested in the traditional formal leadership roles, but more specifically in the leadership practice that stimulates professional development.
Thank you, Joseph. And by now also Anna Cristina has joined us, so I give you the floor to introduce yourself and immediately tell us something about your professional connection with the topic.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I hope you can hear me. So my name is Anna Cristina de Dio. I am the chief of the thematic education policy section at the Global Education Monitoring Report at UNESCO. My connection with leadership is because, as you may know, our latest report, 2024/5, was on leadership in education. We published it in October 2024, and it looks at the leadership in education broadly, so not just school leadership, but also political leadership and system leadership. So that's why I've been in touch, and in fact, the Global Education Monitoring Report considered that leadership in education is one of the most important factors for quality education. So we have looked at leadership in all our report, but in depth only in the really in the latest report. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Christina. Mikael, what is your connection to the topic?
Yes, my connection starts from tuition because I'm teaching leadership in my faculty. But I will also say that from the research perspective, I'm very much interested in the topic, and I'm conducting some research about leadership because I am working mainly through a qualitative approach, through a qualitative methodology. I'm working through action research processes at schools, in communities, investigating on community action. And the more I do research in these fields, the more I realize that leadership is a key issue for successful actions to lead and move the communities or the schools to successful achievements. That's the reason why I'm studying leadership from that perspective. And one of my latest research is on inclusive leadership, to explore how schools need to be led from a broad and shared perspective to achieve the challenge of inclusion, of an inclusive education. That's my connection to the topic.
Thank you, Mikael. Luz, what's your connection to the topic?
In hindsight, it started when I started my career as a teacher. I was teaching handwork at a primary school for primary education. And in the setting I was working, there were also some sewing machines. And lots of children said, we want to work with the sewing machines. And I said, well, I'm not able to, but be my guest. You can learn me how to work with it. You can learn each other. And they did. And I loved it. Students taking that kind of agency and teaching me and teaching each other. And I'm always been fascinated by the idea of the learning processes need to be aligned within your organization. So if we expect students to take agency, which also expects teachers to take agency, but leaders should provide them this possibility to take their agency. And that's what I'm interested in. How can you as a leader provide the learning opportunities? How can you provide the different learning processes within your organization? And how do you do it collectively or collaboratively? So we don't need any more heroes. We don't need teachers, school leaders who say, well, this is the way to do it. I tell you what to do. I think we believe the expertise and the knowledge of all, and you can only do it if you collaborate and if you share leadership.
Thank you, Luz. And last but not least, Micah.
I will have a longitudinal look at the issue, as I typically nowadays do. I start exactly as Luz. 1985, 1986, I came to work as a secondary education teacher in a normal Finnish school, but exceptional from the perspective that it was one of the handful of schools piloting school-based decision-making in Finland. And it was a fascinating place to come as a fresh teacher, because we definitely didn't know how to do that. And there were a lot of fights among the teachers, and sometimes the principal just left the staff meeting because he was so fed up with everything. 7 years later, I became a principal in the same school, and that was looking at whatever we call it, shared leadership, distributed leadership, collaborative leadership from another perspective. So try to learn how to do that. And 1993, I was fortunate to be in the first Finnish university degree program for educational leaders. That was 1996, a few years after I had become the principal. And it was like a savior to me. I understood that the questions that we try to solve in schools are beyond schools. So we have to have a broader view. And my interest at the moment, it's research, it's developing both society, the education system, and educational leaders so that we could all work better. I'm really happy that we have ELNE and the process.
Thank you, Mika. I now want to pose a question, and the first person I will name, but if you want to respond to each other, please raise your hand so you can actually get into the discussion. And the first question is actually about the title of the webinar, because the webinar is called Shared Leadership in Education, a Hydra or a Clear Concept. Now, would you like to elaborate on that and say something about your thoughts on this, well, statement, I would almost say? And maybe, Mikael, you want to start, and then others can raise their hands if they want to respond to you.
Did you say Mika or Mikael?
That was Mikael, that was you.
Okay, because I saw that Mika wasn't saying anything. Yes, okay, thank you. My position is on shared leadership as a Hydra, because when we reflect and when we just collect data and evidence from the reality about shared leadership at schools, we immediately realize that it is not only the single leadership perspective that we need to consider within the school. I mean, shared leadership is evident. It provides good food and good provision for cooperation and collaboration at schools. And that's the best way to facilitate that the school gets the status of a learning community. However, from the learning perspective, it is also important to consider instructional leadership, which has a specific dimension that likely shared leadership does not have. And what is more, when thinking about the present and the future of the school, when thinking about setting expectations, when thinking about how to create the school project, probably a transformational leadership approach would also be convenient. So my position is that a shared leadership is not on its own, but as a part of a complex set of these different leaderships that must coexist within the school, different dimensions and approaches to leadership, so that the school can really satisfy the needs of creating a present and future school project. That would be my position about that.
So Anna, you are next.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm really like what I heard. If I can come in, I would like to start by the definition. I mean, what for me is, or for me and for our report is shared leadership, because it's and even before that, what is leadership? We know that there are different and several definitions of leadership in education. What we have used and built on in the Global Education Monitoring Report 2024-5 was a process of social influence. And in this sense, the key leadership dimension that we have identified that really are a little bit overlapping with what Michele was saying is setting expectation, setting a vision that has been traditionally associated with transformational leadership, a focus on learning that is instructional leadership, and empowering people and promoting collaboration. So in all this definition, we can understand already, or in all these dimensions, we can already understand that there are complex tasks, complex responsibility, and the metaphor of the Hydra really suggests that shared leadership may be complex, multifaceted, and very difficult to manage. And this also implies that each of the person that works in a school can be the head of the school, the teacher leaders, the parents, the students, the external stakeholders and community may have different perspective and interest, which can create challenges in either decision making, but also in coordination. However, if we can say that shared leadership may appear as a Hydra, I think it's very important that it can also really very much resonate with a clear concept, because under certain condition, because the research shows that structured distributed leadership improve school effectiveness. And I think this is really important to say. And the fact that shared leadership is not about losing control, is not about a top-down approach, is not about authority. It's about leveraging collective expertise to enhance decision making. And so in this sense, it can be a clear and effective concept when it is implemented with structure, trust, and a lot of collaboration. So that's what I wanted to say.
When it comes to your question about is it a clear concept, I definitely agree that's not clear. And I think it also comes from a long background. We have been talking already quite a long time ago about, for instance, terms like communities of practice, autonomous work groups, self-directing teams, democratic leadership, collaborative leadership. The title of this seminar is Shared Leadership. And as you have heard, I prefer the term distributed leadership. And all these terms with their various backgrounds do not contribute to a very clear and sharp concept. Therefore, I try to figure out for myself, how shall I approach this? And then I see one clear distinction. First, in traditional leadership terms, leadership is very often or mostly focused on one person in a specific position, in a specific role, a formal role of team leader, principal, director, school leader, etc. When it comes to shared leadership, it means that there are various team members who can influence their work environment and the content in the work environment, not on the basis of formal position, but on the basis of their expertise and experience. And it only works when other colleagues recognize and appreciate this experience, this expertise and ambition and affinity. So I think for myself, to make it more clear, it has to do with, on the one hand, leadership connected to a formal position. And when it comes to shared leadership, it's connected to the expertise and experience that is needed to approach specific topics or problems in a work environment, a school environment, etc. And it only works when you recognize my experience and expertise and that you grant me the authority to act as a leader in that specific situation. And in another situation, I recognize your expertise, and then I love to be your follower. And for instance, when we take the example of we are meeting now with 6 colleagues, we are very different, and but as soon as I know more about our various domains of expertise, I would love to be Luce's follower when she takes the lead when it comes to inclusive leadership or to topics that are related to inclusiveness in the school. And I do this, I prefer to do this as long as she recognizes my my expertise, and then we see that many of these concepts that I mentioned, shared leadership, collaborative leadership, distributed leadership, democratic leadership, they are dynamic concepts within a network of professionals that change constantly, while traditional leadership is focused to one person who has a specific official formal role and often associated with position and salary and power. That is how I try to come to grips with this difficult group of concepts related to shared leadership. Does it make sense?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. And I see Luz immediately wants to respond to you. Luz.
Yes, because it's very clear, Joseph. Thank you. I think what makes it a Hydra is that shared leadership or distributed leadership, you can plan it if you work from a structural point of view. You can say, as a principal, I will grant you some leadership, but I don't think that's truly shared leadership. I think that truly shared leadership is the way, as Joseph mentioned it emerges. You can plan it, it happens. Because when something happens in the field of education, a teacher might think, well, I think we have to do something about it. I think I have the expertise to act on it, and please let me be the leader on this specific topic. So you can't predict whenever somebody will be standing up as a leader, and that makes it very complex, especially when you're in charge, when you're the principal, you are the one who will be responsible. And I see a lot of principals struggling with the concept of shared leadership because they know it's important to have shared leadership because you can't do it on your own. We have to do it together. But on the other side, it's very, very difficult to grant the other the room to take their leadership roles, because at the end of the day, it's my head. When it goes wrong, I will be held accountable for it. So for many principals, it could be seen as a Hydra, because if many people act act on leadership practices, it's hard to feel confident in my co-workers that I will do the right job. And there's always the tendency to become a more managerial kind of leader when you say, well, this is not the way to do it. So in the perception of the school leader, it can be a Hydra because it's very difficult to control it, especially when you're in the system, which is about the old idea of role leadership is about formal roles, and it's about one person. So the structures school leaders are in, principals are in, doesn't make it easy to enable the possibilities for others to take in their leadership roles. And I think I don't have the answers to it, but I think it's very, if you have many leaders, you have to have some kind of coordination. And that's difficult because you don't know what will be happening because leadership might emerge. And I think the one thing you can do as a leader together with your team is to have a very strong ambition or very clear vision, because a vision can be a very strong mechanism of coordinating the complex job you have as a principal.
Thank you, Luz. Mika, you raise your hand.
Yeah, I just love what people are saying. However, I take a larger than life risk, and I say that I start with saying that it's clear. And with this, I mean exactly what has been said earlier. But we used to have the great man theory, that it's the one leader, it's the formal leader. And it used to be the male person there as well. And this, I believe, has changed into that we must lead together. And that to me is the clarity. And then I take another step and say, it's all, after that, the second step, it's all Hydra. Leadership, there's this brick of Bass and Bass, US researchers, 18 main categories for defining leadership. And as the context of education has changed, the mission of education has changed, and I think that affects on what education must do and how it must be led. At the moment, I try to play with saying education is making the future, and educational leadership is making the present, so that education can make the future. And there I would connect that with how we look at learning. And I would like educational organizations to be exactly what several of you said already, communities where we would enact everything that we would like society to be. And that's also how I look at learning. I very much loved what you said, Joseph, about the leader-follower process and how contextual it is. And I remember myself as a principal of a subject teacher school. I'm a linguist by background, so I could make major mistakes with, for example, natural sciences, how to work there, or guidance counseling, special education, you name it. Teachers had much more expertise than I had. And the same thing at the Institute of Educational Leadership as well. I've been focusing on headship, which means that I've deteriorated as an expert in many fields. So my expertise has to be somewhere else. Typically, I've been saying that the one who makes the most mistakes, both as the principal and as the head of the institute, is me. And that deals a lot with what you also, Joseph, talked about, expertise and with equality. I love looking at equality at least at 3 levels. There's the ethical equality, that everybody must have the same human value. Then we have the expertise or knowledge equality, where we all are different. And then what you talked about, Luz, was the judicial equality. Finnish principles often say that they share responsibility, and I always say in the same way, you cannot do it because legislation very clearly says that you are responsible for everything. If you go to the courts, you answer. The teacher may be there as well, but you answer. So there are various levels for the equality and also for collaboration. There would be a lot that I would like to say on this, but I think we will continue, and I tend to have lengthy speeches. So thank you for your patience here. And thank you for wonderful questions, Petra.
Yeah, thank you too, Mika. But altogether, you make me worried. Because the only clarity I heard so far is the fact that we must lead together. We are having this webinar of the ELNE network, the Educational Leaderships Network Europe. And this whole year, our whole policy is dedicated to enhancing this shared and collaborative leadership. And now I hear the people that I consider experts in the field actually confirm that it's not clear at all what it means and what we should do. So I really would like that you help me a little bit on this question. Then why is it important for today's education that we do this if we don't even know what we are doing? There is a Hydra happening here. And still, we are here because we think it makes a difference and it enhances education, or not only we think, because as Anna Cristina said, we actually researched on it and it does enhance results. So how does this work? I'm a little bit confused here. Help us.
Okay, well, why and how? The why is pretty clear, however, because from my perspective, there are three reasons to back shared or distributed leadership at schools and within the educational system. The first one is very practical, operational, managerial. Principals don't have time. And most of the times, principals are seen as managers, not as change makers, not as real leaders. Sometimes the administrative dimension is more important than the real leadership dimension. And from that operational, practical perspective, a shared leadership facilitates that principals can create teams and make leadership a matter of a group, not of a person. And in that perspective, to share the leadership also means to share the administrative tasks, to share the time, to share the problems, and to share most of the things that a single person cannot do on his or her own. So from this operational perspective, shared leadership is more efficient and more successful than other kinds of leadership that are more individual, because at the end, it means that you share the empowering of the institution. This does not mean that you share the responsibility, because delegation does not mean that you are not responsible anymore, but you share most of the tasks, the assignments, and the heart of the project. The second reason to promote a shared leadership is directly related to learning, because we do know that the schools that are more successful are the ones that become a learning community. And a learning community, to build up a learning community, really requires a shared leadership, because in our society where ICT, IA, and other dimensions of access to information and knowledge deeply transform the ways we manage the curriculum, it is impossible that a single person can be the responsible for promoting learning activities. This community of learners, this learning community must be absolutely compatible and matching with that kind of shared leadership, because shared leadership also means, from this instructional perspective, that the learning process, as well as the contents creation by the students, or the co-creation of knowledge, is a collective dimension. And there is still, and now I'm finishing already, but there is still a third reason to promote a shared leadership, which is an ethical one. Because now we are living in societies where fascism and extreme right-wing forces are gaining influence, and we are moving into not into conservative societies, but into intolerant societies. And we must consider that in 2025 in Europe and as well as in the world. And for this reason, a shared leadership itself is a kind of fight to promote democracy from schools. A shared leadership creates an ethos inside the schools which clearly reflect a different way of authoritarianism or different approaches that are emerging and gaining positions in social debates and in politics. And it is also an ethical reason to promote this shared leadership, because shared leadership is the best one to build up and construct democracy from the grassroots. Democratic schools need shared leadership so that we will build real democratic societies. So let's go to shared leadership, Petra.
Thank you. Yes, I saw a lot of nodding and confirming, but Anna Cristina, you were nodding a lot. Why?
Yeah, because I think that what Miguel said really captured uh, a lot of what we have really said in our report and the literature about the importance of shared leadership. One point is that, first of all, as everybody has already said, shared leadership is really becoming critical because schools navigates increasing complexity in education. And so if we think about what was a principle expected to do decades ago, and now we can really have an overview of how this role has changed. So that's the complexity of the goals is very important, and schools are dealing with diverse student needs, with digital transformation, curricular reforms, teacher well-being, issues of burnout, and very complex context also in terms of managing resources, getting resources. So it's there cannot be one heroic person or that can address all these challenges, and we know very well that when things are done together, generally they work much better. So that's why I was nodding a lot, because I think that the 3 points that Miguel made were really very relevant, and especially because leadership in education beyond that includes shared leadership, but leadership in education is really critical. So it's very important to have equality and leadership in education, because the literature in terms of estimates and impacts has assessed that is the second most significant school-related factor affecting student learning after teaching. However, what I want to highlight is that saying that it's important and is critical is also implying that we need to talk about different situations. So countries are not in the same situation. For example, if we think about just some of the very close um, um, stuff that may help ed teachers, like assistant principal that play really a crucial role in daily school operation, but also teacher mentorship, long-term planning. And we see that if we look with the TALIS data of the OECD, the level of empowerment varies across education systems. So in Colombia, Croatia and Chile, for example, only 21 to 28% have assistant principal, while Japan and Singapore have nearly 100%. And at the same time, when we talk about shared leadership, we talk about leadership of the different person that work within the school and outside the school, helping to get a quality education and delivering on the quality education. And we know that teacher leadership is vital. And there are different examples from the literature with different conditions and different situation. For example, there are studies a recent study in California in the United States that has shown that teachers who participated, for example, in agenda setting and decision making felt more committed to school goals. So it's also going beyond the final outcome of better educational learning. Is building shared leadership is important because it allows to build a vibrant community, a more cohesive and inclusive community. And the fact what Miguel was saying about the ethical aspects, I think is very important because showing students, building an environment that is collaborative, I think also offer a kind of role models to students and help them to understand how to behave in a more inclusive and cohesive, which is very important for our societies, I think.
The comments Miguel made, especially on the relationship between shared leadership and learning culture, I think they are very important to me. And he elaborates also on the idea of shared leadership stimulates a powerful learning culture. It could lead to a democratic school culture. And in the end, it also is a favorable school, it ends into a favorable school climate for the students. So I think that's one very important aspect. I'm a bit confused when it comes to the topic of responsibility of the school leader, the former school leader. And this topic of responsibility, so which means that the school leader in the end is responsible, for many school leaders is often a reason to be rather restrictive in promoting shared leadership. And there I would like to make the distinction between responsibility and accountability. And I fully agree that the former school leader in the end is held accountable, but we also want the individual team members in a school team to feel a strong responsibility for their contribution and also for their professional development. And to promote this individual level of responsibility among team members, they need to somehow to have some power. I cannot be held responsible for something I have not chosen for. You cannot say, Joseph, you are now responsible for that or that. I can only feel responsibility for something that I feel engaged in, that I feel committed to, where I can exert some influence. And that's for me also a reason to promote shared leadership, to build on this bigger idea of shared responsibility. And of course, it requires quite some competences of the former school leader to handle this, to promote this and not feel threatened by this movement, by this bottom-up movement of shared or distributed leadership. That's something I would like to add to the previous comments.
So 2 hands are raised immediately. First Mika and then Luz.
Thank you. I wanted to be quick because I was enlightened by what you said, Joseph. Thank you so much. In relation to shared, distributed, collaborative leadership, whatever we call it, leading together, I've been wondering, what is it that we share or distribute or collaborate in? And years ago, decades ago, we started with the concepts of responsibility and power. And the Finnish language doesn't really have the accountability. It's a very problematic concept for us. So typically we just talk about responsibility. And what I learned from what you said, Joseph, that I had not paid attention to is, yes, in the English language, there's responsibility and accountability, and I would totally agree with you that everybody must be responsible. But then how the accountability goes, the judicial equality, that's in many ways administration or legislation, so that varies. And most likely it caused me further problems, but it solved something as well. And I've also been playing with power, then ownership. I think you had, although you didn't use the concept, an agency. And I don't think we can, going back to the ethical leadership, that we can really involve people without them having real authentic power, ownership, and agency in what they are involved with. I would like to continue with strategic leadership, but maybe continue later. I try to answer your challenge, Petra, but would like to give the floor to Luz first, because you were very quickly there after me with the hand too.
Yes, we will do that and then come back to you.
You were a little bit quicker than I was, Mika. I would like to give some comments on what you were already saying. I think that the idea of shared responsibility is very important. And I even believe that as a teacher, you can't do without shared responsibility. The time of going back into your classroom, being the king in your own kingdom, and don't feel responsible, only feel responsible for your own children and not for other one's children, but being a shared responsibility, I think that time is very far behind us, although I hope it's very far behind us. So the deprivatization of teaching is very important. And with that, it comes the idea of collaboration. And I think we haven't mentioned it yet, but collaboration is only possible when there's mutual interdependency. If you really need each other, there's the necessity to collaborate. And I think that's different from 30 or 40 years ago. 30 or 40 years ago, you were able as a teacher to have your own kingdom, but now it's not possible because of the complex issues, for example, raised by Anna. You can't handle them on your own, you have to do it together. And I'm really fond of an old continuum of Judith Warren Little, who says collaboration can be seen on the continuum. The first easy form of collaboration is just sharing ideas and giving each other some kind words. Just being at the coffee table and saying, well, you did a good job, and giving each other some compliments. And on the other hand side of the continuum, it's about joint work, where you really need each other and you have to prepare lessons together, for example, if you co-teach, for example. And somewhere on that continuum, shared leadership perhaps can be taken place. Sometimes shared leadership is only about raising your voice and getting the ideas shared. And true shared leadership is perhaps even in joint decision making, as Anna was mentioning, but also in joint work and collaboration very thoroughly, which you have to be open to accept, as Joseph already mentioned, that the others will lead because they have more expertise. So that's one comment on what you were already saying. And I loved the idea, what Miguel was saying about, well, schools could be seen as a kind of practice place for being democratic within your organization and learning what it means to be a citizen, democratic citizenship, practicing it within your organization, not only for the professionals, but also for the students. as well. And I think it's very important that, I love the comment what Mika was making, as a leader, I make the most mistakes. And if you're very open about it, you give the floor to others to admit that they have made mistakes as well. And I think in order to be successfully, I wouldn't like the word implementing, because it suggests that you can plan it. But if you want to really adapt the possibility of shared leadership, I think it's also only possible when there is a learning community or a learning environment. And I really love the work of Amy Edmondson about psychological safety. If there isn't enough psychological safety, if you don't have the feeling I can speak up and I can say what I think is important, and I can stand up because I think, well, I would like to enact my agency right now because I think something is going wrong, and I'm able to speak up even to my boss, even to my principal, that's only possible when there is a safe psychological environment in which you know it's okay to take interpersonal risks. I can comment on your work because you know that I have the best interest with you in mind. And I'm not there to blame you or to give you some burden, but to help you. And I think that collectively it's very important to build such kind of psychological safety, and the principal can be a very important role model. For example, as Mika was saying, admitting that you're making mistakes as well, because by doing so you're admitting, well, I'm not an expert, I'm a human being also, I can make a mistake, so please help me to make to learn from this mistakes. And now back to Mika, I guess.
Yeah, well, just a second, because I heard a few interesting things which may reflect also on what Mika says, but also what Anna Christina said. The context, the difference of the context. We are in Europe. We have a lot of autonomous countries with different educational system. We all know the European Union policies. They can indirectly really influence education, but they are in national mandates. And the systems are very different from very, let's say, top-down systems or centralized systems to systems which have great autonomy at a school level. So this shared leadership, can it thrive in any school context? What does it have to do with this strategic horizon that Mika actually imposed? Because we are the European School Head Association, and we see so many differences in how our school heads can be leaders. And they're all valuable leaders, and they do a lot of things the same in a kind of principles of leadership, but at the same time, it's very different on how they operate. So I'm curious about your thoughts on this. We go back to you first, Mika, and then we go back to the others.
Thank you, Petra, and gladly. About the mistakes, to me it has been very liberating. I can come up with silly, foolish ideas too, and don't have to worry that people think that our principal, our head, is saying this, so he's already decided his mind. But they can really drive me down and criticize, and that's about the safety issue too. But it also liberates me to have more space and to learn, of course. And to Petra, what you said about the diversity, I would like to have strategic leadership as the lens here. And our research in Finland tells that strategic leadership is more important in the field of education than in the other fields of life, which to me is an interesting research finding. Strategic leadership plays with the phase of the mission, the vision, and the strategy. And the mission deals with why we have education. For Finland, we typically play with 4. We have a word for the first one, which is very difficult to translate in English: enlightenment, humanity. Then we have nation building, then we have learning outcomes, and then we have well-being. But all these have evolved during times too. So like nation building, maybe when we became independent, it was important to build the nation of Finland. Then it was the Nordic welfare nation. Now it's inclusion, it's democracy. About learning outcomes, we had the opening for ELNE, and there they talked about the union of skills, a new approach, and they talk about basic skills and advanced skills, and what is that, and they are evolving too. And then well-being, for Finland maybe that we had free school lunch, but nowadays what we look at, well-being has much, it's much more diverse. It includes a lot of factors, so everything changes here too. Then the vision, what kind of educational system and organizations do we need? Here for Finland, we say that we must transform functional organizations into process organizations. This means that we don't think about the structures, processes, and practices any longer from the perspective of the organization, but from the perspective of the client. And that has to do with the mission of education too. Then several stakeholders. In Estonia, we had a 3 or 4 year project where we had the parental associations educating parents in schools to be better equipped to use their power that legislation gives them. And I see educational organizations transforming in a way that they are these network organizations where very different kinds of stakeholders have a role. And then how do we lead these? The mission changed. They are network organizations. It changed what kind of educational leaders we need. Then about the strategy, how do we reach all this? We need research. Then we need education. And in most European countries, for example, we don't really have proper research-based education for educational leaders. In Finland, legislation is still such that it's enough that you have an administrative licensure, a certificate, 2 exams on legislation, although there is education, but it's not free of charge as all other education in Finland is. Then resources, and there we had last Friday our Institute Pedagogical Model webinar, and we had people from, I think we had around 10 European countries, and very much the like school level or daycare center level. And what they said is that we need time, and we need platforms to share, and that goes a lot with collaborative learning. So for ELNE, I really would like us to come with a common ground to develop education policy so that we can get the support, we can get the resources. We aim at leading together, but then we leave a lot contextual, because it's very important to relish and support the diversity we have in Europe. I do love the European Union, and we have a torch to carry. And now I end.
Yeah, I'm going to break you, Mika, because I saw Josef wanted to say something. I saw Anna and Mikael. So in this order.
Petra, I was struck by something Luz mentioned in a brief comment. And if I recall well, she said something like the problems that we are engaging, that we are facing in education are so complex, nobody can solve that problem by itself. So there's a need for shared leadership to do so. And of course, I fully agree. But I did my research not only on distributed leadership, not only in school system, but also in other work environments. And then I was struck that in the educational system, the job of a teacher is very often a holistic, isolated job. We talk a lot about teams, but many teachers in a school are not really team members. They are administrative parts of a group, and that's what we call a team. But they do not operate as a team. And in such a context, where the professional exerts his or her professional quite isolated, for instance, in a classroom or by him or herself, it becomes very difficult to really go further in this domain of shared leadership, because the primary process does not ask for it. I can do my lessons, I work with my students, and in principle, I am not in need for the direct collaboration with my other colleagues in other classrooms, in other subject domains, etc. So the day-to-day need to go one step further in shared or distributed leadership is not very urgent in schools. However, I have seen in other organizations where the product of a team is mainly defined by the collaboration, the cooperation between team members, for instance, in the healthcare sector, where all the professionals really have to work together to save the patient. There is a very rapid change towards more collaborative ways of leadership. It's difficult as long as there is a very strong hierarchy in the workplace. For instance, in healthcare, between the doctor and the nurse. It requires some kind of equality. So that's something I would like to mention to make it not too romantic when we are searching for opportunities for shared leadership in a school. The second comment I would like to make, Petra, and it has to do with your observation that in Europe we have so many different school systems, policies, etc., which is marvelous because it creates a lot of diversity. But when it comes to perspectives and attitudes towards leadership, we also have to do with cultural differences. I have come across discussions with colleagues about shared leadership that, for instance, in the Netherlands and Denmark and Sweden and Finland and Norway, the reactions are very different from those in Germany, in France, Spain and Italy, for instance. And I don't want to judge anything about it, but you can imagine that these cultural differences when it comes to the need for authority or position play an important role when it comes to implementing ideas about shared leadership. And that's something that the European Education Association should also consider and learn from each other. It's very important to see how you are doing it in your school or in your country, or what are interesting initiatives to have this exchange so that you can learn from each other instead of imposing a standard policy when it comes to organizing a school system. So these are two of some critical remarks I would like to make on the way we organize the primary process in a school, which is still very often a solistic activity, and the cultural differences when it comes to, for instance, the European policy buildings in relationship to the interest in shared leadership.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. We go to Anna Cristina and then to Mikel.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot also to the previous speakers. I would go back 1 second to the question of Petra about the diversity of situation and context, because I think that's really important, because we know very well that contextual factors and institutional arrangement, governance, but also the society itself shape the role of principal and working staff in the school. And we have seen in the report, by the way, I should have said from the beginning, I lead the project on the country profiles, the peer that you can find on education-profile.org, and we have compiled 211 country profile on school leadership, focusing on different issues and in particular on terminology and leadership standards and role and working condition and other training and also teacher leadership and the governance in all the countries and education system of the world. And so we can grasp the differences and what we have done. So the first thing, it's very interesting because we have looked at standards. One can be against or for standards for principal, professional standard for principal. They are very different, very often they can guide a little bit what are principal expected to do in the schools, but they are also controversial for many other reasons that the report explained. What is important is that what we have seen is that, for example, if we think about the different dimensions, the key dimensions of leadership I mentioned before, so setting expectation, supporting staff, promote collaboration, for example, providing parents for information, develop teaching and learning, promote collaboration, support cooperation among teachers. Just about half of the professional standards for principals in the world, so globally, focus on this last dimension that is about support cooperation among teachers. The most important highlighted dimension in leadership standards in set expectation, establish a school vision and objectives. And very similarly, what we have seen in mapping the information from these country profiles is that when we look at the training of principals, we have looked at with 142 programs in 92 countries. We have seen that the dimension that is least covered globally, it's foster collaboration. So only 29% of these 142 programs cover the specific aspect that is fostering collaboration. So that's one point that's very interesting, and very often this fostering collaboration area dimension is covered in the continuous or in service training, and very very rarely in pre-service training. So only 21% of these countries cover foster collaboration in this pre-service training. So that's the first thing. There are differences in how the principals are prepared or can see their roles or within the school, which is already very important because maybe these roles and standards can shape what they expect to do or what compared to what they are expected to do within the schools. The other important things is that when I was talking before about shared leadership and if it is a clear concept or not, I think an important point is are structures and roles defined or not? And when we look with data, we see that, for example, looking with Thalys data, 89% of lower secondary schools in the 48 Thalys countries have a management team. However, there are many variations in how the roles are structured. What are the actors that participate? What is the different responsibilities and accountability for principals in these different management team. And then we can see that, for example, 81% of countries legally mandate teacher participation in school boards. And we know that when they participate in school boards, their leadership is more effective because they can, their teacher in leadership roles can enhance teaching quality and promote professional learning communities, which is very beneficial. So, for example, in the report, we present a different example. In Hong Kong, 600 teachers in leadership roles have influenced instructional strategies beyond even what we mean with middle leaders. And then we can talk about shared leadership, also talking about student and parent engagement. But when we look at this, we see that the differences are even more important because only 57% of countries mandate student representation in school boards. And these again are the information that we have mapped out of the collection of policies and legislation in the different countries. And 64% of countries require principals to provide parents with school performance updates, but only 47% of parents can engage in school governance. So I think it's really very important to talk about shared leadership, but we also need to be very cognizant about the differences that exist that are shaped by policies, legislation, governance models, and also the different autonomy and support in that. We talked about accountability and responsibility. We didn't talk much about autonomy, which are very important when we talk about shared leadership, I think.
Well, thank you, Anna Cristina. You've given us a lot of new thoughts. Michael, I go to you.
Yes.
And may I ask the participants, if you have any questions, put them in the chat.
Thank you so much. Very brief, because I agree with most of the things that my colleagues have been mentioning. But I do appreciate that we talk about challenges, because shared leadership, as we were saying, it's a complex dimension of leadership, which is not easy to set up in a school. And for me, three are the main major challenges that we have in these moments. And as far as I know, they are pretty much common to most of the countries in Europe. So we talk about diversity, but there are also some common trends. And I think that one of the common trends is the black hole that exists when a teacher becomes a principal or a school head. So moving from teacher to school head, it is a challenging situation that is not well resolved. And if this situation is not well resolved, it is very difficult that a shared leadership could take place. No training, even sometimes no economical incentives. Maybe Anna could tell us more about that. No mentoring. So it is still considered that the path from being a teacher to become a principal is a natural process that does not require any kind of support or help. And this is not true. We do know that this is a big issue that we need to face and fill this gap. The second issue, very briefly, is the one related to the invisible leaders, to those who we could call invisible leaders. I mean the middle leadership roles, those subject coordinators, those extracurricular activities coordinators. They are not the school principals, but they are also assuming leadership responsibilities within the school from a distributed, shared perspective. And most of the times, these middle leadership roles have to face a big challenge, They have to deal with the problem, but they haven't got neither the resources nor the decision to face the problem, because this is a responsibility by the school head or some other instances beyond the school. So this contradiction on having from one side asking for someone to solve the problem, but on the other side not to give autonomy, if not enough autonomy to manage the resources and take the decisions that are required to solve the problem, is one of the major issues regarding shared leadership and one of the most disappointing effects of shared leadership. Because when we are talking about sharing, we want to share sometimes the problem, but not the issues that can solve the problem. And this is something that we need to face. And finally, I do
Just
agree
a second,
very much.
Michael. In the chat, somebody responds to what you're just now saying. Like, when teachers, students, and parents take part in leadership, they would need education or support. What do you mean by that? What would they need?
Yes, I was immediately I was going to refer about that, because Anna also mentioned that less than 50% of parents are capable for life conditions to participate at schools. This is, from my perspective, the third problem, because shared leadership is not the relationship between the principal and the teachers, but the relationship between the principal and the whole community, which includes students, parents, and other social communities beyond the school. And at that point, there is a lack of time. When do we prepare and organize the activities with parents? During working time. So it is impossible that parents may join or participate. Or there are sometimes problems related to intercultural dialogue, because some of the parents, for instance, in Europe, who come from countries, from other continents, are not used at that democratic approach to school as we could have in Europe, and they do not understand that they can participate, and it takes a long intercultural process to understand within multicultural schools that participation is good. So you can find a European democratic leader, school principal, who wishes to promote a shared leadership, but on the other hand, he must face the challenge that he has parents who don't feel the need to participate and share the leadership with them. That's all I wanted to talk about. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. We still had a hand from Luz, and I'm coming back to you, Luz. But I also want to point out that we are going towards the end of the webinar. We have about 10 more minutes to go. After Luz, I will ask all of you for a kind of, let's say, final statement on the topic, Hydra or clearness, shared leadership, how you want to look at it. So you can already prepare your mind. Luz, I give you as last panelist speaker the word on a more elaborate way.
Thank you very much. Well, lots comes into mind. The first thing that pops up in mind is if we take a look at the cultural differences in Europe. I am very fond of the work of Hofstede, who made the study of cultural consequences. And he said, well, we can look at different culture from different dimensions. He did a study in the early 90s, but I think it's still valid. He said, well, let's look at big companies like Shell, etc., and are there differences within the countries if I look at organizational culture. And he found that the culture of the country was very important, was very influencing the organizational cultures. And I think that's fascinating. And perhaps it can help us if we use those dimensions. He used, for example, is the culture more feminine or more masculine? Is the culture more how to deal with power distance? For instance, in the Netherlands, we aren't very fond of authority because we think, well, we're all equal, which is completely different than other countries. Like Joseph was mentioning, if you look at in the northern countries like Finland, Denmark, Netherlands, the cultural context is completely different than Spain, Italy, etc. and Hofstede gives some explanations for it. Another dimension is uncertainty avoidance. How are we dealing with uncertainty? And another dimension is individualism versus collectivism. And I think it would be very interesting to take that scope of to take that looking at the different dimensions. Are those dimensions still there in the different cultures in Europe? And how do they feed the ideas of distributed or shared leadership within the organization? Is there a correlation between the culture and on a national level with the culture and the ideas of shared leadership within the organization? I think that would be fascinating to figure it out and to combine it with the study Anna was mentioning, how our policies developed. Are they also connected with those cultural dimensions? That's one thought. The other thought, even within those cultural differences, I think that's very important that we have a clear conception of the perception of the leaders themselves. Anna was also mentioning something about it. How do they define their own roles? There was a very interesting PhD study last year in the Netherlands conducted by Robert Menting, who said, well, the belief systems of the school leaders are very important in how they enact on leaders on distributed or shared leadership. And he made, for example, a distinction. If you've got a transactional idea of leadership, it's very hard to work on shared leadership. If you have a more servant view of leadership, it's easier to enact on leadership, shared leadership within your organization. And that might be another interesting perspective. How does the leader see their own role combined with looking at shared leadership? And what's the perception of the professionals and the broader community? I like the ideas that you mentioned, Miguel. It's not only about the teachers, it's also about the whole learning environment, which is the school. And it's also important to look at the perceptions of the ones who could be leaders. But do they consider themselves to be a leader, or do they think, well, I come from a culture which it's not normal that I could enact leadership roles? So that might be another interesting dimension. What are the belief systems of the professionals, the people within the community, and the leaders themselves? And finally, I'm also triggered by the thing you mentioned, Miguel, as well, that, well, perhaps we need some schooling. Perhaps everybody had you can feel the urge to be a leader, but you have to learn how to lead. And I like to use the word of second order leadership. In teacher education, we're familiar with the term of second order teaching. As a teacher educator, you teach teachers. And by doing so, you are a second order teacher. And perhaps it's also an idea to look at leaders, school leaders, and saying, well, you're the one who can facilitate leadership development of others. And in doing so, you can become a second order leader, which is a different role, which is difficult because you haven't learned how to do so. But you can help others to develop their leadership practices. For instance, as middle leaders, teacher leaders, but perhaps even also students and teachers. So the idea of second order leadership, I think it might be, to me, it's a compelling idea anyway.
Well, thank you, Luz. You are having about 1 minute per person for this final statement, so that will be a challenge to be short and to the point. This time I want to start with you, Mikael, and then I'm going on to the others.
Thank you so much for such inspiring discussion among us. It's been really enlightening in lots of terms. And my last minute would be devoted to some of the words that Luz shared with us when she referred about the big step forward that we've made when leaving behind this model of the class as a kingdom of leadership and to move into the school as the new kingdom. My vision is that regarding and thinking about distributed leadership and shared leadership, the next step is to leave behind the school as a kingdom model and accept that the community where the school is settled, the new place where this shared and distributed leadership should take place. By considering this idea of an educating city, by considering the notion of the rest of cultural and educational institutions that do networking with the school to promote and facilitate this learning of this community learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mikel. Joseph.
Yes, Petra. I'm very happy that I think most of us share the importance of shared leadership and its the need for developing further, also to improve the quality of education system and especially the professional development of our team members. Something we didn't discuss this morning, but I think it's very important, are some critical conditions to bring shared leadership a bit further. Miguel mentioned already one topic that I would like to stress as well, and that is when we promote that other team members take up leadership roles, we also should grant them the authority to do so and to offer them the resources to take decisions and to achieve their objectives. It's impossible to say, now you take up this role, but I decide still about the money and whether about the green light or not. So that's something that we still have to resolve. That's in the context. And then another very important condition, what I would like to mention, are the competences of team members to take up leadership roles. It can only be done when team members develop the communication and collaborative skills to do so. And it's quite complex how to react to a colleague who claims some kind of authority in a certain domain, and that I have to grant my colleague the authority to do so. In other words, it requires quite some skills also for me to be your follower. When talking about leadership, it is easy to talk about the leadership role, but it automatically means that others need to take the follower role. And that's something that has to be learned still. So these two conditions I would like to stress in bringing further this topic that we are discussing this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Anna Cristina.
I forgot to unmute. So thanks a lot. I agree that we are in agreement on the idea that shared leadership is important. I think this is a critical issue, and we have recognized that maybe it's not so clear, but it's very important, and it's not clear because it's a complex concept that requires nevertheless distributing leadership roles and across different actors that go beyond the principal, the assistant principal, the teachers, but really covers also the students, the wider school community, because in that way education may become more democratic, more inclusive, more responsive. Just to mention, I would like to mention that we didn't mention at all something that I think is very important in the current context, and the fact is that as schools are changing, as students are much more diverse, we need also to take into account that the diversity is very important within the schools, and this means that principal needs to also to be able to have the competence to recognize the diversity and share leadership in a much wider way. So the words that we have used for the recommendation in the report are very relevant to what we are discussing today. They are select, develop and recognize, trust and empower and share. And I think this is really something that summarizes a little bit of the discussion we have had today.
Yes, well,
and to conclude, we are publishing in end of April a report on distributed leadership in Latin America. We just issue a report on inclusive leadership in Eastern European countries and Central Asia. So that's in addition to the global report.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Well, now we have 1 minute left, or even not even 1 minute left, and Mika and Luz didn't have the floor. but I have to be strict. A webinar has a certain time. I feel this is a very interesting and important topic, so maybe we can retake this situation and do it again. I'm very honored that all of you took the actual, oh, now I lose my words. I'm very happy that you were all here and took my invitation. Thank you very much for being here. I'm sure we will get back to all of you. Thanks also to the participants, and hope to see you all again in the ELNE network, because I think we have a lot to do. Thank you.